For over 2 decades, my one and only job was to fight against God. In the spirit realm where I operated, I could actually see the prayers of Christians. Most of them, honestly, were pathetic. They looked like tiny, flickering candles trying to survive a hurricane, and they were laughably easy to snuff out. But every now and then, a prayer would rise that would make all of us tremble in fear. It wasn't a candle, it was a pillar of fire. And I'm going to tell you exactly what creates it and why it made us run for our lives. To understand what that pillar of fire is, and how I went from being the one who fought against prayer to someone who now depends on it, we have to go back. Back to the beginning of my 20-year career in the highest levels of the occult. This isn't an easy story to tell, and it's filled with truths most people never hear. If you feel this is a story you need to hear, I invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications. Please also hit the like button so more people can find this. I have a question for you. Have you ever truly felt the power of your own prayers? Let me know in the comments. My story doesn't begin in some dark satanic temple like you might imagine. It starts in a small, dusty village outside Guadalajara, Mexico. It begins in the home of my grandfather, a man the village both respected and feared. He was a curandero, a folk healer, and to me the things he did weren't evil. They were just power. He taught me that in a world that feels chaotic and unfair, power is the only thing that matters. And that single belief set me on a path that nearly cost me my soul. To understand how I ended up facing that pillar of fire, you have to understand how it all started there, in that house. My grandfather's house was a strange mix of worlds. On one wall, you'd see a dusty painting of the Virgin Mary, but right below it, on a small wooden table, would be bundles of dried herbs, strange stones, and bowls filled with black salt. The air always smelled of incense and something else, something heavier, like damp earth. He wasn't a cruel man, but love in that house was something you earned. I remember the first time he taught me a simple incantation. When it worked, he put his hand on my shoulder and smiled. That was it. That was the currency. Power was affection. As I grew older, I saw the fear in my village. I saw boys my age get caught up in violence over nothing, their families left with nothing. I felt this crippling sense of being small, of being a potential victim in a world that didn't care. But then I'd look at my grandfather. No one touched him. No one cheated him. People came to him broken, desperate, and they paid for his solutions. They feared him, and in that fear, I saw safety. I didn't want to be a victim. I wanted to be the one people were afraid of. It felt like the only way to survive. He started teaching me more, moving from simple herbs to controlling energies. My first real test was a spell against a rival family who had insulted him. I remember focusing all my anger, all my fear, and channeling it just like he taught me. A week later, we heard their entire crop had withered and died overnight. The rush I felt wasn't just power, it was control. It was intoxicating. I knew right then that my grandfather's small-time magic wasn't enough for me. I wanted more. And at 19, that hunger for more brought me to the attention of people who operated on a much, much darker level. The man who had found me introduced me to the Coven. It wasn't a group of kids in black robes. These were professionals, lawyers, businessmen, people of influence. My initiation was a test. They wanted me to look at a photograph of a business rival and tell them his weakness. I closed my eyes and I didn't just get a feeling, I saw it. I saw a small, shadowy creature whispering greed into his ear, perched on his shoulder. I described it in detail. He's about to make a reckless financial decision, driven by ego, I told them. 2 weeks later, the man was ruined. I wasn't an apprentice anymore. I was a weapon. My clairvoyance became my currency. They didn't just want spells. They wanted intelligence. I became their strategist. In our ritual chamber, which was just a soundproof basement in a luxury home, I would guide their attacks. While they chanted, I would project my consciousness and see the spiritual landscape around our target. I could see the cracks in a person's spiritual armor, a secret addiction, a hidden resentment, a deep-seated fear. I'd tell them exactly where to strike for maximum damage. The power was immense. I was no longer a scared boy from a village. I was a general in an invisible war, and I was winning. But the first signs that something was wrong started to appear. I couldn't turn it off. I'd be walking down the street and see things. Dark, leech-like entities clinging to people, feeding on their anger or despair. I remember sitting in a nice restaurant, trying to have a normal meal, and I saw the spiritual filth clinging to the people around me so clearly that I lost my appetite. I started having nightmares, not of monsters, but of being trapped in a dark room with 1,000 whispering voices. I told myself it was just the price of power, and I pushed the fear down. I had achieved the control I always craved. I was respected, feared, and wealthy from the consulting fees I charged. But I was ignoring the truth. The whispers in my dreams were getting louder, and sometimes I'd hear them when I was awake. The entities I used to command were no longer just tools. They felt like partners, and then they started to feel like my bosses. I had climbed so high that I couldn't see a way down. I was trapped by the very power that was supposed to set me free, and I was beginning to suspect that the bill for my services was about to come due. The power I had gained was supposed to bring me peace, but it did the exact opposite. I couldn't shut it off. I'd walk through a crowded mall and see things, dark, shadowy things clinging to people, feeding on their secret miseries. I remember trying to have dinner at a fancy restaurant, and the spiritual filth I saw on the patrons was so thick I couldn't eat. The whispers from my nightmares started following me into my days. Sleep offered no escape. Every night was a battle, and every morning I woke up more exhausted, more paranoid than the day before. The peace I craved was further away than ever. My relationships withered and died. How can you love someone when you can see the spiritual leeches of jealousy and insecurity attached to them? Every interaction became a transaction. I saw the greed in my clients' eyes and the envy in my coven members' hearts. They weren't my friends. They were vultures waiting for me to fall. The dark energy I channeled was also eating me alive from the inside. I developed strange illnesses doctors couldn't explain. I looked 10 years older than I was, and I had this darkness in my eyes. Animals would run from me. Little kids would start crying if I looked at them. I was completely, utterly alone. The final illusion to shatter was control. I thought I was the master, but I was just a slave with a longer leash. The entities I commanded started making demands. They'd wake me in the middle of the night, wanting me to perform a ritual, and if I hesitated, the pressure in my head would become unbearable. I saw what happened to a member who tried to just walk away. He had a car accident on a perfectly straight road. There were no skid marks. We all knew it was a message. There was no retirement plan. There was no exit. I was their property. I tried to get out. Twice. The first time, I just stopped my rituals for a week. The physical sickness that hit me felt like my organs were shutting down. The second time, I actively renounced it in my mind, and that night, every glass object in my house shattered simultaneously. I gave up. My lowest point came in the winter of 2008. I was sitting on the floor of my multi-million-dollar home, sick, gaunt, and surrounded by occult artifacts that felt like a tomb. I hadn't spoken to another human being in days. I was a prisoner in my own life, with no hope of escape. I was just waiting to die. It was in that pit of despair, on the cold marble floor of my empty mansion, that the last dregs of my pride ignited. The failure with Don Ernesto's family had been a public humiliation within the coven. I needed to reassert my dominance. I needed an easy win. I remembered hearing about a small, insignificant church on the outskirts of the city, one that held a children's prayer meeting on Wednesday nights. It was the perfect target. Weak, unprotected. A show of force to remind everyone, including myself, who was in control. I dragged my aching body from the floor and walked to my ritual chamber for the last time. As I began the incantation, focusing my will on that little church, my vision opened. I could see them. Not a room full of powerful prayer warriors, but a handful of kids, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting in a circle with a young woman. Their prayers weren't eloquent or structured. They were simple, almost childish. Jesus, please protect our church. Jesus, we love you. But in the spirit realm, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Their simple words weren't creating flickering candles of light. They were weaving together, forming a single, brilliant sphere of pure, white energy that pulsed with an innocent, unshakable power I had never encountered. I pushed forward, ignoring the warning signs. I poured more of my energy into the ritual, my voice chanting the ancient words of binding and destruction. That's when the air in my soundproofed room dropped 20 degrees in a second. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears, growing louder and louder until it was a physical pressure against my skull. I tried to shout the final words of the curse, but as I did, the sphere of light in my vision exploded. It wasn't a spiritual attack. It was a physical force. I was lifted off my feet and hurled backward, slamming into the concrete wall 10 feet away with a sickening crack. I lay there on the floor, gasping for breath, the taste of blood filling my mouth. My ribs were broken. Every ounce of power I had was gone, replaced by a pain and terror that was absolute. And then I heard it, a voice. It wasn't in my head. It was in the room, vibrating through the floor, through my broken bones, through my very soul. It was a voice of pure, unquestionable authority, a voice that owned the universe. It said just 7 words: "You cannot touch what is mine." In that instant, I knew I had just picked a fight with God Almighty. All the entities I served, all the power I had amassed, it was all a child's game compared to this. There was only one thought in my mind: safety. Bleeding, broken, I crawled out of that room. I didn't grab my wallet or my keys. I stumbled to my car and drove, not away from the church, but towards it. I burst through their doors in the middle of their meeting, a wrecked man in expensive clothes, and collapsed at the foot of their simple wooden altar. That night, the first person I told my story to was their pastor. He just looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Welcome home, son." If you've ever had a moment that proved God was real, please share it below and like this video so others can find this hope. In those first few weeks at the church, the pastor, a kind man named Miguel, asked me so many questions. He wanted to know what I saw, what I knew from the other side, so I told him. I explained that most of the prayers I ever saw were just spiritual noise. From our perspective, they looked like thin, smoky wisps of light that barely rose a few feet before fizzling out. They were prayers of routine, of doubt, prayers from people whose hearts were in 10 different places. Low-level spirits would just hang in the air and bat them away like they were annoying flies. They were completely, utterly harmless to us. But then I told him about the pillars of fire. When a person was truly broken, when they had nowhere else to turn and cried out to God with everything they had, it was something else entirely. It wasn't a wisp of smoke. It was a column of pure, white-hot energy that shot straight from their heart, through the roof, and into the heavens. It pierced every spiritual layer. And the response was instant. Angels would descend. And these aren't the cute babies with harps you see in paintings. They are terrifying. They're 10-foot-tall warriors made of lightning, armed and armored. And their faces are pure, holy fury. They would form a perimeter, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would dare cross it. That's what happened with Don Ernesto. I told the pastor how we spent 3 nights performing our strongest rituals, using animal sacrifices and incantations that could crumble a business. But his wife, every morning at 5 a.m, she would get on her knees, weeping, and her desperate prayers created a wall of fire around their entire property. I saw it with my own eyes. Our curses would fly toward their house, hit that wall, and either disintegrate instantly or be reflected right back at us. 2 members of my coven fell violently ill. Her prayer wasn't a shield, it was a weapon. I finally understood that true prayer wasn't about asking, it was about surrendering. And that revelation changed everything. But my conversion wasn't the end of the war. It was just the start of a whole new battle. But revealing those secrets to Pastor Miguel didn't end the war. It just brought the battle directly to my doorstep. The enemy doesn't let go of its high-level assets easily. For the first 40 days, my life was a living hell. Every night, I had the same terror-filled dream. I was being dragged back into my old ritual chamber by dark figures, the smell of sulfur filling my lungs. During the day, objects in the small room the church gave me would slide off tables. Whispers would follow me, reminding me of the power I'd given up, promising me death. The attack came from 2 fronts. My old coven put a price on my head, forcing me to move to a secret location. They saw me as a traitor who knew all their secrets. But the second attack was almost worse. Many people in the church were terrified of me. They'd see me and cross to the other side of the hall. They whispered that my conversion was a trick, that I was a spy sent to destroy them from within. I had run from the darkness only to find myself completely alone in the light, trusted by no one. There were moments, sitting alone in that room, where the temptation to go back was almost overwhelming. I missed the feeling of control, of being feared. The loneliness was crushing. The battle was won, not in one big moment, but in 1,000 small surrenders. It was won by the church members who formed a 24-hour prayer chain for me, their prayers becoming my shield. It was won the first time I, in sheer terror, shouted the name Jesus at a shadow in my room and watched it flee. And it was won by me scrubbing the church toilets week after week, proving my heart had changed through service, not words. So I faced 2 wars at once. A spiritual war against the demonic forces I once served, and a relational war against the fear and mistrust of the people around me. The first was won by learning to wield the authority of Jesus' name, backed by the prayers of the faithful. The second was won through humility and patient service. I never fell back into the occult, but I stumbled in my faith many times. It took nearly 2 years for the threats to subside, and for me to truly feel like a part of the family of God, to finally find the peace I never knew existed. After those battles, the silence was the strangest thing. For 20 years, I never had a single night of peaceful sleep. There was always a hum, a spiritual static of fear and paranoia. I lived in constant terror of the spirits I served and the rivals who wanted me dead. Now I sleep. I actually sleep through the night. The peace isn't just an absence of fear. It's a presence. It's a quiet strength that holds me. I traded a life of constant torment for a peace that makes no earthly sense, and it's more real than any power I ever held. The power I once had was a heavy chain. I thought I was a master, commanding demons to ruin lives for money, but I was just a slave with a longer leash, being destroyed from the inside out. Now, the authority I have in Christ feels light. It's not about control, it's about freedom. I've gone from being a slave master who was himself a slave to being a son of God. And I don't use power to destroy anymore. I get to be a part of setting other captives free, and there is no greater feeling. But don't think for a second that it's all easy. Some scars don't fade. I still see their faces sometimes, the people whose families and businesses I helped destroy. I'll be in a grocery store and see a man who reminds me of one of my targets, and the guilt hits me like a physical blow. That's a cross I have to carry, but that same pain is what fuels me. It's a constant, burning reminder of the grace I received, and it pushes me to share the truth so that no one else has to suffer like they did. So my life today isn't glamorous. I lost my wealth, and it never came back. My old family is gone, replaced by my church family with Pastor Miguel. My health is better, but the years of abuse left their mark. What I gained was so much more. People who once crossed the street to avoid me now ask me to pray for them. I am living proof that no one is too far gone. And that brings me to the reason I'm telling you all this. The one truth I learned that the enemy desperately wants to keep hidden from you. And that brings me to the one truth I learned that the enemy desperately wants to keep hidden from you. The greatest lie he has ever told the church is that your prayers don't matter. I am living proof that they are the single most powerful force in the universe. From my side of the war, I saw it. Prayer is not a quiet ritual or a religious duty. It is a declaration of war from a position of absolute victory. Your words, your faith, have the power to move heaven and shake the foundations of hell itself. So I'm begging you, stop praying safe, polite, religious prayers. God isn't moved by your perfect words. He is moved by your desperation and your faith. Go into your room, get on your face before Him, and cry out with everything you have. Show Him your brokenness, your fear, your pain. Don't hold anything back. I promise you, from a man who used to be on the other side, that kind of prayer doesn't create a flicker of light. It erects a pillar of fire that will make all of hell tremble in terror. And if you are listening to this and you're still trapped where I was, in the occult, you know the fear I'm talking about. You know the whispers. You know you are a slave, no matter how much power you think you have. I am telling you today that the Master I serve, Jesus Christ, broke my chains in an instant. His power is real, and it is greater than any darkness. There is a way out for you. His name is Jesus, and He is waiting to set you free, just as He did for me. If this story has touched you, please subscribe and turn on notifications for more testimonies of God's power. Like this video so it can reach others who are lost, and share it with someone you know who needs to hear that there is hope. Please leave a comment below with your own story or if you need prayer. I want you to remember this. The enemy wants you to believe you're just a tiny, flickering candle. But the truth is, you were born to be a pillar of fire.